The Corellian drift sat in dock at way station Muhar, 9 the way it always sat, tired, scarred, and still there. The hull plating had gone the color of old dishwater years ago. The cargo ramp had a squeak in it that no amount of oil had ever fixed. The docking clamps grabbed the ship with a sound like a large animal clearing its throat, and they did it every single time, and Mara Voss had stopped noticing both sounds the same way you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing. She stood on the loading platform and ate a protein bar. It tasted like someone had described food to a machine, and the machine had done its best. She ate it anyway because it was 600 station time. The coffee wasn't ready yet, and her body needed fuel, whether the fuel deserved gratitude or not. She was 44 years old. She had the kind of face that had stopped making apologies for itself. Somewhere around age 35, gray was coming in at her temples, and she had not done anything about it and did not plan to. Her hands were rough, her jacket was old, her boots had been resoled twice in the past 3 years and would probably need it again by end of season. She stood on the platform and she watched the dock. She watched it the way you watch a door you already know is going to open, not worried, just watching. The GTA enforcement skiff came in at 6:14. No hail first, they never hailed first anymore. 2025-54. It came in smooth and low and quiet and docked itself 2 slips down from the Corellian drift with the particular confidence of something that has never once had to think about whether it had the right to be somewhere. Mara finished her protein bar. She folded the wrapper into a neat square. She put it in her jacket pocket. 2 Vilhari stepped off the skiff, bone white uniforms, translation collars blinking blue at their throats. They had scanning equipment on their belts and data pads in their hands and expressions on their faces that were not cruel and not angry. They were doing a job. The job involved her ship. This was simply the shape of the morning. They walked toward the Corellian drift without looking at her. She stepped aside and let them on. Her engineer Dmitry Selk was in the cargo hold when the inspectors arrived. He was 61 years old and built like a man who had spent 4 decades not asking for help lifting things. His hair was gray and cut close. His hands were large and calloused and had fixed more things than most people had ever broken. He was stacking the last of a supply order when the 2 white uniforms walked in, and he stopped stacking and he stepped back and he said nothing. He had been doing this long enough to know that saying nothing was the correct response. The first inspector ran his scanner along the cargo manifest display. His translation collar blinked twice. He scrolled his data pad. Processor units, he said. Rare earth composite. 17 crates registered under secondary. Investor. He looked at Dmitry when he said this. The look was not unkind. It was simply informational. These units are Class 9 transit material under current compact tariff schedules, and Dmitry said nothing. Pre-clearance was filed under Earth Unified Government registration protocols. The inspector continued scrolling. EUG registration is no longer accepted as valid. Compact standing standard. Tariff levy applies. These units are subject to seizure for non-advance payment. Mara was standing at the cargo hold entrance. She had followed them in. Those were declared on the manifest, she said. Her voice was even. Filed 2 weeks ago. Full. Preclearance documentation, transit. Route cargo class, estimated delivery. All of it. The inspector looked at his data pad. He scrolled. He nodded in the way that people nod when they have already made a decision and are performing the motion of consideration. For the record, preclearance was filed under EUG protocols, he said again. Those protocols are not currently recognized. The filing carries no legal weight under the current compact. Framework assessment stands. There was nothing to say to this. She had tried saying things to this before, on 3 other ships on 4 other docks, in the last 3 years. The words went into the assessment report, and the assessment stood, and the crates got taken, and the white uniforms got back on their skiff. She said nothing. Dmitri said nothing. The second inspector called for a loading drone on a handheld communicator, and the drone came, and it moved through the cargo hold with mechanical patience, and it took all 17 crates off the Corellian drift in 22 minutes. The inspectors signed their forms. They gave her a copy of the seizure notice. The notice had a reference number on it and a mailing address for formal disputes, and a fee schedule for filing an appeal. The appeal fee was listed at the bottom in small text, 4,000 credits. The inspectors left. The skiff departed without hailing on the way out. The dock was quiet again. The space in the cargo hold where 17 crates had been was just empty floor now, and the empty floor said nothing about what it used to contain. She found Dmitri sitting on that floor. 20 minutes later, his back was against the wall. His legs were out in front of him. His hands were resting on his knees, palms up, open, fingers slightly curled. He was looking at his palms the way a person looks at something there, trying to understand, not in grief. Exactly, not yet, but in the moment. Before grief, when you're still trying to find the explanation that makes things make sense. Mara stood in the doorway. She looked at his hands for a long time. Those 17 crates were his retirement plan. Not the whole of it, but enough of it that the hole they left was real and deep. 3 years of savings put into a co-investment. She had helped him structure a solid plan on a safe route. Processor components that had a guaranteed buyer on Vega Station and a 22% margin on delivery. He had shown her the numbers with the careful excitement of a man who had learned not to be too excited about things in case they didn't work out. Warm and steady like a coal fire that's been running clean a long time. Solid plan, she had said. Smart use of the hull. She stood in the doorway. She did not go sit beside him. She did not put her hand on his shoulder. She was not built for those gestures, and he had worked with her long enough to know it, and anyway it was not what either of them needed. His hands were open on his knees. She looked at them one more time, then she turned and walked to her cabin. She kept her files on a local drive that was not connected to the ship's main network. She had done this since before Dmitri worked for her. Before the ship, before the Corellian drift. It was the kind of habit that develops when you have once lost everything that was connected to a system you trusted, and you decide quietly, with no drama, alone on a dock at 2:00 a.m. that you will never trust a connected system again. She did not think about what she had lost. She did not think about it the way you do not think about something that is always present, by work, by decision, brick by brick over 13 years, a wall with that thing on the other side of it. The file was labeled simply GTA Transit Compact. 2271. Full text, she had looked at parts of it. Before, the sections that were directly relevant to her day-to-day, tariff, schedules, enforcement rights, transit, authorizations, the sections every human captain with any sense had read 3 times and highlighted and could quote from memory, the sections that told you exactly how much they were allowed to take from you and how often and with what notice period. Nobody read the whole thing. It was 12 pages. It had been written by committees from 9 different species working in 14 different legal traditions, all translated at least twice before anyone signed anything. Reading it in full was the kind of thing that happened to people who had made very poor decisions about how to spend their years. She made a coffee. She sat down. She opened the document at page 1. She began to read. The station cycled into its night mode and the lights in the corridors dimmed to half in the dock. Outside her porthole went quiet except for the low hum of the environmental systems. The coffee went cold. She made more. Midnight came and went. The numbers on the station clock moved with the slow patience of things that have no interest in whether you are paying attention to them. She read the way a person searches through a broken machine, not looking for the parts that are working, looking for the part that isn't. Most of it was what she expected: tariff structures and transit rights and enforcement jurisdictions and definitions and subdefinitions and appendices to the subdefinitions and footnotes to the appendices. Legal language built not to communicate but to pin meaning in place so it could not escape when someone needed it to mean something slightly different. She had a notepad beside her. She wrote almost nothing on it for the first 6 hours. Few page numbers, a few reference codes. She wanted to come back to. The notepad sat mostly blank and she kept reading. At 3:40 station time, in the deep quiet of the ship with the environmental systems humming and the dock outside dark and Dimitri long since gone to his bunk, she reached clause 7442. Subsection H, 13 lines. She read them. She read them again, slower, each word placed down carefully in her head in order, the way you lay out tools before a job, everyone in its place. None of them rushed. The clause was a jurisdictional boundary clause. It defined the limits of GTA tax authority. Specifically, it defined the limits of GTA tax authority over vessels that were not registered to a recognized compact signatory government. She read it a third time. The Earth Unified Government had been a recognized compact signatory. That was straightforward. It had been a signatory since 2271, since the day human beings had walked into the Grand Conclave Chamber and sat down at the table and signed 47 pages of documents that nobody on Earth had fully understood yet. The Earth Unified Government had also been dissolved 6 years ago. Economic collapse, political fracture, and a long, slow unwinding that everyone had seen coming and nobody had managed to stop. The human colonies ran under independent charters now. The shipping fleets ran under independent registrations. Nobody had formed a new unified government because nobody had agreed on what one should look like, and in the meantime everyone kept using their old EUG registration code because the GTA's automated processing system still accepted them. The GTA system still accepted the codes, but the legal standing the codes represented was gone. 6 years gone, which meant that the Corellian drift and every ship like her, every independent human freighter, running old EUG registration papers, was not registered to a recognized compact signatory government, which meant under Clause 7442, subsection H, the GTA had no jurisdictional authority to levy tariffs against them, none, not one credit, not one crate, not the seizure from this morning, not the 3 years before this morning, not the 16 other seizures she had filed protest on and paid appeal fees for, and eventually absorbed because the appeal process cost more than the cargo, and that was the point. That had always been the point, not any of it. She sat very still for a long time. The dock outside was dark. The station hummed. Somewhere further back in the ship, the cooling system clicked twice and went quiet. She opened a new document. She typed a number at the top, the total value of everything that had been taken from the Corellian drift in the 6 years since the EUG dissolved. It was a number she had been adding to for a long time. She knew it without having to look it up. Then she opened the compact charter. In a second window, navigated to Article 17 and found the statutory interest rate for unlawful seizure of goods in transit. She applied the interest rate to her number. The new number was larger, considerably larger. She looked at it for a while, then she closed the interest rate document and opened a fresh file and started typing names. Captains she knew, people she had shipped with, work beside, shared dock space with across 3 years of trade routes, people who had all at some point had bone white uniforms walk through their cargo holds. She wrote their names, and beside each name she wrote a number, an estimate of what had been taken from them, and she kept going until she had 37 names and 37 numbers, and a running total at the bottom of the list. She looked at the running total. She sat with it for a moment, then she got up and poured out her cold coffee, and made fresh coffee and stood at the galley counter drinking it in the dark, looking at nothing in particular, turning a single question over in her head with the slow patience of someone who is not rushing toward an answer but making sure the answer they find is the right one. She went back to her desk. She read Clause 7442 one more time. She had read it correctly. The clause said what she thought it said. She had not made a mistake. She exhaled once, quiet. Not a dramatic sound, just a breath. She said to the empty cabin, to the dark porthole in the cold dock and the small sounds of the ship around her. Interesting. Dmitri found her in the galley at 900. She had her laptop open and a fresh coffee and a notepad filled with handwriting and the particular kind of stillness about her that, in 6 years of working together, he had learned to read correctly. It was not the stillness of someone resting. It was the stillness of a machine running at full power with nowhere to put the output yet. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. Without asking, she did not turn the laptop away from him. He looked at the screen. He read for a while. He drank his coffee and said nothing until he had read it twice. How long have you been up? He said. Don't worry about it. He was quiet. He looked out the galley porthole at the dock, the same dock where the crates had been loaded onto a GTA drone 23 hours ago. Those crates, he said, just putting the words in the room. I know. 3 years. Mara. I know. She looked up from her screen. I'm going to get it back. He looked at her for a long time. He was not an easy man to surprise, and she could see something shifting in his face, not hope. Yet because he had stopped letting himself get a hope too quickly. But the small, careful thing that lives just before hope when you're listening. Hard to figure out if someone is serious. How? He said. She turned the laptop toward him and let him read. Read the clause. He read it again. His coffee sat cooling, and he did not touch it. When he finally looked up, his face had the expression of a man who has just understood a joke that was told a very long time ago and has only now, years later, finally landed. This has been in there the whole time, he said, since 2271. Nobody ever read it. Nobody ever read all of it. He looked at the screen for another long moment, then at her. What do you need? She pushed the notepad across the table. Start at page 3. Verify every seizure we have documented. Cross-reference with the levy schedules in Appendix 4. I need to know the exact numbers before I file anything. He picked up the notepad. He looked at it. He looked at her. This is going to get loud, he said. Not a warning, just a statement of geography. This is where we are. This is what the terrain looks like from here. Yes, she said. The GTA won't. No, she agreed. They won't. She was already typing. He uncapped her pen and started on page 3. The galley was quiet. The station hummed outside. The Corellian drift held still around them, the same scarred ship it had always been. Nothing changed on the outside, nothing different to any passing eye, just a dented freighter and Slip 47 with its systems on standby and its ramp squeaking in the recycled dock air. Inside, 2 people were doing math, the kind of math that had been waiting 43 years for someone patient enough to do it. 3 days after the seizure, Mara's bunk looked like a legal office that had lost a fight with itself. 4 empty mugs on the small desk. A notepad so full of writing that she had flipped it over and started on the back. Printed pages stacked in 3 piles, each pile held in order with a different colored clip, each page marked in at least 2 places, an empty protein bar wrapper that had been there since yesterday and that she had not thrown away because throwing it away required standing up, and she was not done sitting. Yet she had slept twice since finding the clause. 4 hours the first time. 3 the second. She had not found this unsatisfactory. On the wall above her desk, held up with a single piece of tape that had been there so long it had gone yellow, was a photograph, old, newsreel quality, grainy, taken from a dock camera at a distance. A ship being towed, a mid-sized freighter with a name across its hull that was mostly readable even at that resolution and that distance. Edna me, she did not look at it while she worked. She did not need to look at it. It was just present the way certain things are present in the room, in the air, in the particular way a person holds themselves when they are sitting alone and doing something that matters. She wrote the exemption claim by hand first. Then she typed it. Then she read it back to herself out loud slowly, the way you read something when you need to hear where it breaks. It did not break. She sent it through the official GTA channels at 800. Station time on the 4th day. Exemption claim 7442H. Formal citation of clause 7442. Subsection H of the GTA Transit Compact. 2271. Full text of clause attached. Legal argument, the Corellian drift and all Similarly situated human vessels are not registered to a recognized compact. Signatory government following the dissolution of the Earth Unified Government GTA tariff jurisdiction over such vessels has therefore no legal basis under the compact zone terms. Request for immediate return of all seized goods and refund of all tariff payments made under invalid authority. She sent it. She noted the time and the reference number. She picked up her communicator and started making calls. The first call was to a man named Hendricks who ran a water ice hauler on the outer belt routes. She had known him for 9 years. He had been boarded 5 times in the last 4. She told him about the clause. She did not explain it at length. She sent him the relevant pages and said, "Check your registration documents, see if you're a signatory." He called back 2 hours later. He was not a signatory. The second call was to a woman named Priya Ose who ran a passenger shuttle between 3 colony stations and who had lost a month's revenue to a tariff dispute the previous year. Mara sent her the clause. Priya read it the same day and called back with a voice like someone who has just found their wallet in a coat they hadn't worn in years. She was not a signatory either. The third call, the 4th, the 8th, the 15th. Mara worked through her list of 37 names the course of 2 days, and she was careful about how she did it. She did not say, "We are going to fight the GTA." She did not say, "This is the beginning of something." She said, "There is a clause, read it, check your papers. I will call you again in a week." That was all she said. She kept the calls short. She kept the list to herself. She made more coffee and she kept working. GTA's response to her exemption claim arrived 9 days after she filed it. It was a form letter. She knew it was a form letter because the reference number in the header was auto-generated and the legal citation in paragraph 2 was the same one she had seen in 3 previous rejection notices over the past 4 years, used for entirely different situations, which meant it was being deployed here not because it was accurate but because it was on the approved list of responses and someone at Central had decided it was close enough. The letter said exemption claim denied, legal basis successor, population doctrine, Earth Unified government's treaty obligations are considered inherited by human populations regardless of governmental dissolution per established compact case law. Claim does not meet threshold for review. Appeal available within 30 days. Appeal fee 4,000 credits. She read it. She set it down. She picked it up and read it again, this time with a pen in her hand. And she made notes in the margin. Note 1. Successor population doctrine. She wrote the case number, the letter cited, and added it to her research list. Note 2. 4,000 credits. She wrote appeal fee. She sat with that for a moment. Then she opened the compact charter and looked up the section on appeal processes for jurisdictional disputes. Article 9, subsection 3. She found it in 4 minutes. Jurisdictional dispute. Appeals were exempt from standard processing fees. Explicit. 2. Sentences not ambiguous. The 4,000 credit appeal fee was itself a violation of the treaty. She noted this. She wrote the article number beside the fee amount. She circled it. Then she filed the appeal and she paid the 4,000 credits, and in the payment notes field, a small text box that GTA processing Clerks almost certainly never read. She wrote the legal designation code for extorted processing costs under protest, pending statutory recovery under the treaty, a payment made under protest. With that specific designation converted the fee into a recoverable debt with interest at the statutory rate. She had not invented this mechanism. It was in the treaty. It had been there since 2271. The humans who wrote it had put it there, with care in a subsection in language. That took 20 minutes to find but was unambiguous once you found it. She added the 4,000 credits and its accrued interest to the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet was growing. The call from Assessor Chavarim came on the 11th day. He was Velhari Midrank, the kind of bureaucrat who had been doing his specific job long enough that he was very good at it and very settled in what it required of him. His translation collar rendered his voice into something measured and professional with a slight formal quality, the way certain people's voices sound when they have spent years speaking carefully. He was, she realized, within the first 30 seconds, not calling to threaten her. He was calling to help her. He had looked at her claim and he was calling to explain, with genuine professional patience, why she was going to lose. Captain Voss, he said, I've reviewed your exemption filing. I understand the argument you're making. I want to be direct with you because I think it will save you time and resources. A brief pause. The successor population doctrine is well established in compact case law. The dissolution of a signatory government does not terminate treaty obligations for the populations that government represented. This has been litigated 4 times in the past 30 years. Humans were not party to those cases, but the precedent applies equally. Mara was sitting at her desk. She had a pen in her hand. She was not writing anything. The claim will be denied at appeal, Chavarim continued. The fee you have paid will not be returned under standard dispute resolution. I would recommend withdrawing the appeal, which will stop further costs from accruing, and accepting the current assessment schedule going forward. I recognize that is not what you want to hear, she said. What case law? Short pause. I'm sorry, the 4 cases you mentioned. Successor population doctrine. What are the case numbers? Another pause, slightly longer this time. I can send them to you, please. She said he did. Within the hour. She suspected he thought he was being helpful. She suspected he thought that a captain reading 4 dense legal precedents would confirm what he had told her, and she would withdraw the appeal. She read all 4 cases that night. She read them carefully with her notepad open beside her, making notes. By midnight she had found 3 places where the GTA, in the years since those cases were decided, had taken enforcement actions that directly contradicted the precedents their own legal team had just cited in a letter to her. Actions against human vessels. Actions she had records of. Actions that measured against the case law Chavarim had just handed her looked considerably less like lawful tariff collection and considerably more like something else. She filed 3 additional claims the next morning. Each one cited the GTA's own case law as the source of the violation. She noted the time. She added the amounts to the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet had started as a single column: value of goods, seized, date, ship, captain's name. It had been a personal record, the kind of thing you keep because you need somewhere to put the numbers so they stop circling in your head at 2:00 a.m. It was not a single column anymore. It had expanded across 3 weeks of research into something larger and more careful seizures organized by date and by treaty clause violated, interest calculated per Article 17, additional claims for unlawful appeal fees, cross-referenced with the case law the GTA had sent her, each violation flagged against the precedent that made it a violation. She had also quietly been collecting numbers from the captains on her list. Not all 37 had responded. 22 had. Some had sent her their records directly. Some had just given her totals. Some had asked questions. She answered carefully and briefly, and then asked them to send their numbers. She had not told any of them what she was building. She had said, "I need accurate records for a legal filing. I'll be in touch." 22 sets of record, 22 histories of seizures and fees and appeal costs and documented losses stretching back in some cases longer than her own. A retired captain named Vila Maris had records going back 8 years, meticulous and organized in a way that suggested she had always believed they would be useful someday. An old hauler called Jerome Park had kept every seizure notice in a physical folder in his bunk because he said, you never know. Mara added their numbers to the spreadsheet. She applied the interest rate. She updated the total at the bottom. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Dimitri found her at the table on a Tuesday evening. She had not moved in what looked like several hours. There were 2 mugs near her laptop, both cold. She was working with the focused stillness of something load-bearing, the kind of concentration that other people tend not to interrupt. He made fresh coffee without being asked and put a cup beside her. He looked at the screen. He had been involved enough in the past 3 weeks to understand most of what was on it. The clauses, the cases, the filing records, the running correspondence with other captains. He understood the shape of what she was doing even when she didn't explain it, which was most of the time, but he had not seen the spreadsheet at full scale before. He looked at the total at the bottom of it. He was quiet. That's across how many ships, he said. 22 records so far, not counting mine. He looked at the number again. He picked up his coffee and held it without drinking. It is that accurate. I've verified every number twice. He set the mug down. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, which he did not usually do. He was not a hovering kind of person, but the number on the screen seemed to require proximity, seemed to require a witness. This is 6 years of seizures, he said. Yes, from 22 ships, yes. And you're going to file a claim for. I'm going to invoice it, she said. Word claim felt imprecise to her. Claims could be disputed, diminished, negotiated down. An invoice was a number on a page. It said, "This is what is owed, pay it." Dimitri looked at the total again. He was not a man who made sounds involuntarily very often, but he made one now. A short, low sound that meant something between "that's impossible" and "you're serious, they're not going to pay this," he said. Some of it, she said. Enough of it, and the rest. She had thought about the rest. The rest was the point. Actually, the rest was not about money at all. The rest was about the clause becoming active, cited part of the legal record. The rest was about a Door that had been closed for 6 years. Being wedged open in a way that could not be unwedged. The rest was about what happened to the captains who came after. The ones who were not her, who had not. Read the full treaty text at 3:00 a.m. on a dock in the dead hours. The ones who would benefit from a precedent they never had to set themselves. She did not say all of this. It was too many words for what was a simple concept. They'll negotiate, she said. That's fine. Every credit they agree to return is a credit they have already agreed they took without the right to. Every credit is on record. The number matters less than the record. Dmitri was quiet. He looked at the photograph on the wall above her desk. The grainy newsreel image, the ship being towed. He had worked with her for 6 years. He had never asked about that photograph. He had always known the way you know things about people you work alongside closely, that the asking would be unwelcome. The photograph was just present, the way it was present, and that was enough. He looked at it now for a moment, and then looked back at the screen. What do you need from me next? He said. She had a list ready. She had been making lists for 3 weeks. I need someone to carry the route while I'm dealing with this, she said. Vega station delivery, then the Harlan built supply run. You can do both in 12 days if you pick up a second engineer at Muhar. He nodded. And I need you to tell me honestly, she said, if you think this is the wrong move. He thought about it. He thought about it the right amount. Not too fast, not performing the consideration, just actually thinking. No, he said. I think it's the only move. A pause. I just want to know you've thought about what happens if it goes wrong. I've thought about it. And she looked at the spreadsheet, the names in the left column. 22 ships, 22 captains who had sent her their records and asked no questions and trusted her with numbers that represented years of their lives. Then, I've wasted some time, she said, and I paid 4,000 credits for an appeal that gets denied, and we go back to the route. And the GTA keeps taking what it wants. Same as before. She said it evenly. It was the truth. She had made peace with it. Dmitri nodded once. Okay, he said. He picked up his coffee and drank it. She turned back to her screen. The station hummed outside. The dock was quiet. The Karelian drift sat still around them, unchanged, unnoticed by anyone who passed. Nothing written on the outside of it that explained what was being built inside. She opened the appeal response she had been drafting and went back to work. The GTA had sent her their case law. She was going to use every word of it. She filed the notice at 600 station time on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the seizure. It was called a notice of jurisdictional dispute. It was a specific legal instrument, defined Compact Charter Article 3, and it had one particular feature that made it different from everything else she had filed. An exemption claim could be denied, an appeal could be rejected, complaint could be processed and stamped and buried in a reference number and forgotten. A notice of jurisdictional dispute, properly filed and properly served, required all GTA enforcement action against the named vessel to cease immediately, pending arbitration under the Charter's own rules. The GTA could not legally board the Karelian drift while the notice was active without reclassifying their own action as piracy under compact law. There was a catch: proper service of the notice required the document to be broadcast on open frequency. Public record, the filing alone was not enough. The transmission was the legal act. She had known this since the second week of her research. She had been waiting until she was ready. At 6:15 she undocked the Karelian Drift from way station Muhar 9 and moved out into open space, not fast, not dramatically. The way you pull out of a parking space when you know exactly where you're going and you are in no particular hurry to pretend otherwise. She set a course for nothing specific, just open lane, enough distance from the station for clean transmission. She checked her scanner 3 minutes after she cleared the docks. Outer perimeter, a GTA enforcement wing appeared on the screen. 6 ships. Standard interdiction formation, 2 in front, 2 flanking, 2 in reserve. They had been waiting. She had been flagged when her third appeal triggered an escalation threshold in the automated monitoring system, and the wing had been positioned and ready. For 2 days, she had known they would be there. She had filed the notice 6 hours early, specifically so that it was already on record before she undocked. She opened a broadband channel. Human accessible frequencies first, then the standard compact transit frequencies, then the general commercial band that every ship within 2 light minutes was required to monitor. She cleared her throat. She began to read. The document was long, legal language, dense in places, with specific article numbers and clause citations that she read aloud exactly as written, slowly and clearly, the way you read something you need people to understand rather than something you need people to be impressed by. Her voice on the open channel was even, not dramatic, not angry. She read the way a person reads a maintenance checklist, item by item, each one complete before the next one begins. The GTA enforcement wing hailed her at 6:22. The lead ship, a midweight interdiction cruiser that was roughly opened on the standard enforcement channel. The translated voice was clipped in professional Karelian Drift. This is GTA enforcement wing 73. You are broadcasting on restricted channels without authorization. Cease transmission immediately and prepare for boarding. Inspection 2. She kept reading. She was on page 3 of 11. They hailed her again at 6:25. Same message, slightly shorter. Cease transmission, prepare for boarding. She read page 4. At 6:29 the wing moved into interdiction position, the 2 lead ships dropping to bracket her fore and aft, close enough for proximity alert lit up yellow on the navigation board. A standard maneuver. She had seen it done to other ships. The message it sent was not subtle. We are here, we are larger, and we are not leaving. She glanced at the proximity alert. She noted the distance. She kept reading. The enforcement wing did not fire. They did not attempt to physically dock with her. They could not, because she had filed the notice 6 hours ago and it was on record, and the moment they touched her ship while an active jurisdictional dispute was pending, every subsequent action they took would be logged under a different legal category entirely, not enforcement, not tariff collection, piracy, under the compact's own definitions, their own rules, the ones they had written. She read page 6 on the station behind her and on 2 cargo haulers running parallel trade lanes within broadcast range, and on a Velhari passenger ship that happened to be sitting in the adjacent docking arm when her broadcast Began people were listening, not all of them understood what they were hearing. The legal language was not easy. The clause numbers meant nothing to most people without context, but the shape of it was clear, a single human freighter, sitting bracketed by 6 GTA enforcement ships, reading a legal document out loud on open channel while the enforcement ships did nothing. That was the shape of it. That shape was interesting. On the station, a cargo hauler named Hess Park, who had been docked for a fuel stop and was waiting out of 2-hour service window, pulled up his ship's registration documents for the first time in 4 years. He read the relevant section. He sat very still for a moment. He was not a signatory. He had not known that. He had simply been using the old registration codes because they still worked in the automated systems, and nobody had told him to do otherwise. He opened his communication system. Mara was on page 8. The wing held position. They did not leave, and they did not board. She could hear in the particular quality of their silence on the open channel, the absence of follow-up hails, the absence of any further instruction, the sound of 6 ships waiting for someone else to decide what to do. That someone else was at GTA Central. She had expected this. Central had to be consulted because nobody in the field was going to take responsibility for the next step without authorization from above. The next step was either board her and accept the legal consequences or stand down and accept a different kind of consequence. Neither was a good option. Both required a decision that nobody at field level was paid to make. She read page 9. Central Communication System of the Karelian Drift was monitoring the broadcast frequencies while she read. In the bottom left corner of her navigation display, a small counter was running. It was not a standard navigation instrument. She had written the code for it herself 3 weeks ago on a night when Dimitri was asleep and the ship was quiet, and she had needed something to do with her hands while she thought. The counter tracked the number of ships that opened a broadcast channel on the same frequency as her transmission within response range. When she started reading, it said 1. By page 5 it said 4. By page 8 it said 11. She did not look at it directly while she read. She tracked it in her peripheral vision, the way you track something moving at the edge of your sight when you don't want it to know you've seen it. Page 10. The counter said 17. She finished reading at 7:01. The last line of the notice was a formal statement of intent to pursue arbitration under Compact Charter, Article 3, with all enforcement actions against the Karelian Drift considered invalid and legally actionable pending resolution. She read it clearly. She read the document reference number. She the date and time of filing. She closed the broadcast. The open channel was quiet. The enforcement wing was still there, still bracketing her. The proximity alert was still yellow. 6 ships, none of them moving, none of them hailing. She turned off the broadcast indicator light and turned on the coffee maker that sat on the narrow shelf behind the navigation console. It was a small machine that took 3 minutes and made 1 cup at a time and had a broken temperature gauge that meant the coffee was either too hot or not quite hot enough and never exactly right. She had owned it for 9 years. It was the same coffee maker she had owned on the ship. Before this one, she waited. The counter in the corner of her navigation display said 23. The reply from GTA Central came at 7:48. 47 minutes of silence from 6 ships, sitting in interdiction position around a single freighter while Central found someone senior enough to make the call. She had used the time to finish her coffee and start a second one and review her filed documents one more time and do nothing else of consequence. The reply was not sent to her directly. It was sent to the enforcement wing commander on the wing's internal channel. She could not hear it, she could see the result. The 2 lead ships moved forward position to lateral, then wider. Then the formation opened and the wing pulled back to standard observation distance, close enough to monitor, too far to constitute interdiction. They were no longer blocking her, they were watching her. That was different. The counter said 31. Assessor Chavaram contacted her at 8:11. He had not called her since she filed the 3 additional claims based on his own case law. She had wondered if he would call again at all. She had thought he probably would eventually, because he was the kind of official who believed that problems could be explained away by someone patient enough to do the explaining. He was patient. She gave him that. He opened without a greeting this time, which told her something about the morning he was having. Captain Voss, the notice you filed and broadcast today, I want you to understand what you are doing. His translation collar rendered his voice carefully, but something in the cadence was off in a way she had not heard from him before. Flatter, more precise. The professional patience was still there, but it was working harder than usual. This is not a standard appeal. This action will escalate to formal arbitration. The process is lengthy and expensive, and the outcome is not guaranteed. I understand that, she said. Precedent you are citing has never been applied to the successor population. Doctrine, the legal community's view is that the doctrine supersedes the jurisdictional clause. You may be correct that no one has tested this specific intersection of law, but that does not mean the test will go in your favor. I understand that too, she said. Pause on his end. Then why, how long has the enforcement wing been outside my ship? She said. He was quiet for a moment. 47 minutes, approximately, pending Central's assessment. In those 47 minutes, she said, 31 ships opened a broadcast response to my transmission. I would check that number again. It was still climbing when you called. Silence, not the professional pause of a man gathering his thoughts. Something different, the silence of a person recalculating. She waited. Captain Voss, he said. His voice was very careful now, each word placed down like something fragile. How long have you been planning this? She looked at the counter in the corner of her navigation display. It said 38, since 2271. She said. A longer silence. You weren't alive in 2271, he said. No, she said. But the people who wrote Annex Clause 7442 were thinking about me. She closed the channel. The enforcement wing pulled back to minimum monitoring distance at 8:30 and held there. They did not leave the area. They were not going to leave the area. Withdrawal without authorization would be its own documentation problem, but they were not blocking her anymore, and they were not hailing her, and the proximity alert on her navigation board had gone from yellow to the pale gray of routine traffic. She sat in her pilot's chair and looked out the forward screen At nothing in particular, open lane. Stars in the middle distance doing what stars do, which is exist without any investment in what is happening around them. The counter said 44. She had not said it with a specific number in mind. She had not decided in advance what the number needed to reach before she felt something. She had built the counter because she needed to know the number was real, and now the number was real, and she was sitting with what that felt like. It felt like a weight that had been carried for a long time, shifting into a different position, not gone, not lighter exactly, just different. Redistributed. She heard Dimitri's boots on the corridor floor behind her. He came in and stood at the edge of the navigation bay. He had a mug in each hand, real coffee, the expensive kind he kept in a sealed container in his personal stores and brought out on occasions that cleared a certain threshold of significance. He held one out without saying anything. She took it. They sat together in the quiet of the forward bay, her in the pilot's chair, him leaning against the door frame, and they drank their coffee and looked out at the open lane and the stars that didn't care, and the 6 GTA enforcement ships sitting at a polite distance doing absolutely nothing. The coffee was good. It was very good, actually. She had forgotten in the weeks of bad galley brew and cold mugs and protein bars eaten over legal documents that coffee could taste like this. She drank it slowly. The counter in the corner of the navigation display ticked up. It said 47, then 49, then 52. She watched it without turning her head, the way you watch something at the edge of your vision that you don't want to startle by looking at directly, the way you watch a fire you've been trying to start for a very long time. In the first moment after it finally catches, she did not say anything. Neither did Dimitri. Outside, the stars held still. The enforcement ships held still. The open lane ran on ahead of them, wide and empty, the same lane that human freighters had been running for 40 years, paying tolls they were never owed, because nobody had read the whole document. The counter said 58, then 61. She finished her coffee. She set the mug down on the console beside the broken temperature gauge coffee maker that had been with her since before this ship, since before this fight, since before she knew there was a fight to have. She looked at the enforcement wing on her scanner, 6 ships holding distance, waiting for an order that was not coming. She pulled up the next document on her screen. There was still work to do. She never saw GTA Central. In the weeks that followed the broadcast, she received communications from it, documents from it, formal notices, stamped with its reference codes and its seals and its automated case numbers. She built a picture of it the way you build a picture of a fire you cannot see, from the smoke coming under the door, the temperature of it, the size of it, the direction it was moving. It was moving fast, that much was clear. On the 3rd day after the broadcast, a retired legal archivist named Sion Park surfaced from a Velhari station where she had been living quietly for 6 years, and sent a public data packet to every human ship registry address she could find. The packet contained 114 pages of annotated documentation on the drafting process for the GTA Transit Compact. 2271. Meeting notes. Revision histories, the original version of Clause 7442. Before it went through 4 rounds of committee editing, the email chain in which 3 human legal delegates had, specifically and deliberately chosen, language that created the jurisdictional boundary that Mara had found, not accidentally, not as an oversight on purpose planted in the document like a seed in dry ground in the hope that 43 years later the rain would come. The packet also included a note from Seoyeon Park that said, in its entirety, I have been waiting for someone to find this. I was beginning to think I would have to find them myself. By the end of that day, the packet had been forwarded across human shipping networks to a number of recipients nobody was formally counting. By the end of the following day, it had made it to 3 Velhari news services and 1 compact general interest digest that was read by species who had no particular stake in the matter but found it interesting. Things that are interesting travel. The notices started coming in volume on day 5. Not 31 ships, not 61. By day 5 there were 407 filed notices of jurisdictional dispute from human vessels across the primary trade lanes, each one citing Clause 7442, each one broadcast on open frequency, each one adding its reference number to a growing public record that was becoming too large for any single GTA processing office to manage. Mara knew this because she was tracking the filings. She had a second counter running now next to the first one, and she checked it every few hours and wrote the number down and added it to a running log she kept in a paper notebook because the paper notebook could not be remotely accessed or administratively flagged or automatically included in a seizure inventory. By day 8 the number was over 1,000. By day 12 3 of the largest human corporate freight companies, operations with 50 or more vessels each, companies that had been absorbing the tariff costs as a line item in their annual budgets because it was cheaper than fighting, looked at the number and made a calculation and filed notices for their entire fleets simultaneously. That was a different kind of noise. A single captain on a battered freighter was an anomaly. 1,000 independent haulers was a movement. 3 major freight corporations was a structural problem for the GTA budget. On day 14, the crew of the colony ship Perseverance, a vessel that had been running supply routes between outer human settlements for 22 years and paying transit levies the entire time, filed a notice that was accompanied by a formal demand for restitution going back to the EUG dissolution. Their number was the largest single claim filed so far. Mara added it to the spreadsheet. GTA's first counter move came on day 9, an emergency administrative reclassification. A memo circulated through the GTA's processing system, reclassifying all human vessels as compact successor state registered, regardless of the EUG dissolution, on the basis that successor population doctrine established continued treaty standing. The reclassification was retroactive. Under this new designation, the jurisdictional clause would not apply. The notices would have no legal standing. Business as usual could resume. Mara read the memo when a copy of it came to her through channels she did not name, even in her private notes. She read it twice. Then she opened the ship system documentation, the technical manual for the Corellian Drift's navigation AI, a dense and largely unread document that ship owners received when they took possession and rarely looked at. Afterward, she turned to Section 44. 3 years ago, a human software cooperative called the Open Transit Collective had released a navigation system firmware update. The update had been free. It had been distributed quietly through the standard shipping network maintenance channels, listed as a routine processing, efficiency improvement, and most captains had let it install automatically because that is what you do with routine processing efficiency improvements. The update contained, buried in its operational parameters, specific automatic reclassification protocol if a ship's navigation detected an active jurisdictional dispute filing associated with the vessel, and if a GTA enforcement boarding was then attempted, the system would automatically reclassify the vessel as an unmanned emergency transit vehicle for the duration of the boarding. Unmanned emergency transit vehicles operated under a separate section of the Compact's Transit Code, written for automated cargo drones and emergency supply ships that operated without crew, a different fee structure, a considerably smaller one the GTA had written to move emergency goods quickly through crisis zones without tariff delays. The GTA had written it. It was their code. The humans had just read it. Every ship running the updated firmware, which was most of them because it had been distributed as a routine update, and most people accept routine updates, would automatically reclassify under boarding. The emergency reclassification memo the GTA had just issued was not compatible with the unmanned vehicle code. You could not reclassify an unmanned emergency vehicle as a successor state registered vessel. The two designations had different legal parents. They could not coexist in the same system entry. The GTA's own automated processing infrastructure would reject the reclassification for the vessels running the firmware. The memo would do nothing, Mara noted. This in her log. She did not send the note to anyone. She did not need to. Open Transit Collective had distributed the update. The ships were already running it. The process was already in motion, separate from her, requiring nothing from her. She moved on. Second counter move came on day 16. Transit license review. The GTA announced a mandatory review period for all human vessel transit licenses, pending resolution of the mass jurisdictional disputes. During the review period, licenses would be considered suspended. Vessels operating on suspended licenses would be subject to immediate enforcement action. The review period had no stated end date. It was a clean move. She gave them that if the ships couldn't operate, the pressure to withdraw the notices would build quickly. People had cargo to deliver and bills to pay and crew to feed, and a suspended license made all of that impossible. A few weeks of economic pressure distributed across 1,000 ships would produce results that legal argument alone might not. She read the announcement. She looked at the compact Charter Article 9, Subsection 7. Subsection 7 covered enforcement actions during pending jurisdictional disputes. It was very clear. A jurisdictional dispute in active arbitration proceedings constituted protected legal process interference with a party's ability to operate normally during protected legal proceedings was classified as obstruction of process under the Compact's administrative code. Suspended license was interference with normal operations every suspended license was therefore a separate, actionable obstruction charge. Each obstruction charge carried its own statutory penalty. She opened the spreadsheet. She added a new column. She began entering the licenses that had been suspended cross-referenced against the date of each vessel's active notice. Filing the column filled quickly. The total at the bottom of the spreadsheet grew. She added it up. She looked at the new number. She added it to the running total. The running total was now large, in a way that required a moment to fully register. Each time she looked at it, she noted the new column in her log. She sent the relevant compact citation to the legal contacts she had been building across the human shipping community. 2 retired lawyers, 1 active compact trade attorney, and Seo-Yun Park, who had turned out to have a mind like a very well-organized filing system and an appetite for this kind of work that matched Mara's own. The obstruction charges began to be formally filed within 48 hours. The spreadsheet kept growing. The third counter move came from Assessor Sheva Rum. He contacted her on day 19 and he did not open with legal argument this time. He opened with an offer, a private settlement, a fixed sum paid directly to Mara Voss in exchange for withdrawal of all claims and notices associated with the Corellian drift. The sum was not small. It was, in fact, larger than she had expected them to offer, which told her something about how the past 19 days looked from inside GTA Central. She listened to the full offer. She asked him to send it in writing through the official GTA communication system using their formal legal reference codes. He paused. They written offer through official channels creates an administrative record. He said yes. She said. Another pause. Longer. Captain Voss, I am trying to give you a way out of this that works for you. Send it in writing, she said. He sent it. She received the written offer, logged it, assigned it a reference number, and attached it to the case file as a formal exhibit under compact administrative law and official written settlement offer from a GTA representative constituted an implicit acknowledgement that the offering party considered the underlying claim to have legal merit. They had just put their own acknowledgement of liability into the record. She sent Sheva Rum a brief reply, thanking him for the written correspondence and noting that the offer would be considered as part of the broader arbitration process. She did not withdraw anything. On day 23 of Alhari, academic named researcher Methuselah published a paper in the Compact Legal Review. The paper was titled, Translation, something close to Retroactive Legal Infrastructure, How Human Delegates Colonize the Compact Framework at the Point of Entry. It was not meant as a compliment. Methuselah was arguing that the humans had acted improperly, that embedding dormant legal mechanisms in a treaty signed in good faith by other parties was a form of bad faith negotiation that violated the spirit of the compact, even if it was technically within its letter. The paper was very widely read. It was widely read partly because the academic argument was interesting and partly because of what the paper confirmed, that the humans had done this deliberately at the table in 2271, when they were new to the compact and every other species at the table thought they were dealing with frightened newcomers who would sign whatever was put in front of them. They had not been frightened. They had been reading. Mara received 3 copies of the paper forwarded to her by different people in the same afternoon. She read it once. She noted 2 places where Methuselah's argument relied on a misreading of a subsection that she happened to know. Well, she did not send a correction. It was not her paper, and the misreading did not affect the legal proceedings. She filed it. She moved on. Dmitri came back from the Vega station run on day 26. He walked into the galley of the Corellian drift and found Mara exactly where he had left her 12 days earlier, at the table, laptop open, coffee at elbow, the paper notebook beside her, and the particular stillness that meant the machine was running. He had been in contact with her while he was away. Brief and practical messages about the route and the cargo, and one question about a customs form that she had answered in 4 words. He had not asked her how things were going. He knew how things were going from the news services. He was monitoring. He made coffee and sat down. He looked at her. She looked back. How was the run? She said. Fine. Delivered clean. Picked up the return cargo at Harlan. He set his mug down. The customs officer at Vega asked me about the notices, whether I had filed one. Had you? I filed it from the ship 3 days into the trip. He looked at her steadily. You could have told me too. You didn't need me to tell you. He accepted this. He drank his coffee. After a while he said, show me where we are. She turned the laptop toward him. He looked at the spreadsheet. It was not the same spreadsheet he had last seen. It had grown sideways and down. New columns extending the original structure, new rows added daily as claims were filed in obstruction. Charges were logged and the settlement offer was entered and the interest calculations were updated to current date. He scrolled. He read slowly. He looked at the columns for the counter moves, the reclassification attempt, the license suspensions, the private settlement. He looked at the column that tracked the settlement offers, implicit liability acknowledgement, and what that meant for the broader arbitration case. He reached the bottom. He looked at the total. He sat back. He pulled the laptop toward him and ran the calculation himself, top to bottom, checking her numbers against the interest rate and the penalty schedule she had cited. He did it carefully. He did not do it because he thought she had made a mistake. He did it because the number was large enough that he needed to verify it with his own hands before he could hold it properly. In his head, he ran it twice. Then he got up and went to his bunk and came back with a sheet of paper, actual paper, the thin kind used for cargo manifest, slightly crumpled at the corner, and a pen. He wrote the number down by hand, the full number with all its digits, in his large, careful handwriting. He slid it across the table to her. She looked at it. She did not pick it up. She just looked at it sitting there on the table between them, written in pen on cargo manifest paper, the number that represented 6 years of illegal seizures across hundreds of ships, calculated with compound interest adjusted for obstruction penalties, inclusive of the GTA's own inadvertent acknowledgments. It was a number that should not have been possible to arrive at. It was possible only because of 43 years of patience by people who were long dead and 6 weeks of work by people sitting in this galley, and a clause in a document that nobody had ever read all the way through. Is that right? Dmitri said. Yes, she said. He looked at it. They're not going to pay all of it. No, but they're going to pay some of it, enough of it she said. He nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee. He looked out the galley porthole at the dock, which was the same dock it had always been. The same scarred, ordinary working dock. It was on the morning the two white uniforms walked through and took his crates. He looked at it for a while. Then he looked at her. When do you go? To Central, he said. 3 weeks, she had received the arbitration date 2 days ago. Formal session. Grand conclave. Chamber standard proceedings, she had acknowledged receipt and confirmed attendance. You're going alone. There's no one else to send, she said. There's no government, there's no delegation, she said. In matter-of-factly, the way you state a condition of weather, there's just the filing and the spreadsheet and me. Dmitri was quiet for a moment. Take the good jacket, he said. She looked at him. I'm serious, he said. The one without the engine burn on the left cuff. She had one jacket with an engine burn on the left cuff and one jacket without. The one without was not significantly better than the one with. They were both working jackets. They both smelled of the ship. I'll think about it, she said. Dmitri, who knew exactly what that meant, nodded and drank his coffee outside. Way station Muhar 9 hummed and cycled and processed its thousands of daily transactions, ships in and ships out, cargo moving in all directions, the ordinary machinery of commerce that had been operating exactly the same way for years. Slightly less of it was going to the GTA now than it had been 6 weeks ago, not because of any blockade, not because of any protest or demonstration or active force, because of a counter in the corner of a navigation display and a number written in pen on a piece of cargo paper, and a woman who had read all 4,000 pages. 3 weeks, she thought. She closed the laptop and went to bed. For the first time in 6 weeks, she slept for 8 full hours and did not dream about anything at all. The Grand Conclave arbitration chamber at GTA Central was large enough that sound moved differently inside it, not an echo. Exactly. More like the room absorbed noise and considered it before giving it back. Slightly changed, it had seats for representatives of 47 species. Most of them were filled. Mara Vos sat at the human representatives' table alone. The table was long. It was designed for a delegation, several people, support staff, legal advisors, arranged in a row the way the other species had arranged themselves. Velhari table had 9 people at it. The Torathi coalition had 11. There were assistants and legal aides and people whose specific job appeared to be handing documents to the people next to them at precisely the right moment. Mara had a laptop, a notepad, a copy of the spreadsheet printed on 11 pages and organized with colored clips, same as always. A cup of coffee she had made in the small preparation room off the main corridor before the session opened, using the machine in there, which was considerably better than the one on her ship. She had worn the jacket without the engine burn. It still smelled like the ship. She had decided this was acceptable. The lead arbitrator was a Velhari named Senior Arbiter Thokalos. He was old in the way of Velhari officials who had survived long enough to become architecture, not just working in the institution, but part of its structure. Load-bearing, present in a way that he had been doing this job in various forms for longer than Mara had been alive. She could see it in how he moved, how he arranged his Documents. How he looked at the room with the calm attention of someone who had seen every version of the situation and had developed exact procedures for each one. He had not seen this version before. She could see that too in the slight pause before he opened proceedings, the way his eyes moved across the human table, the long empty stretch of it, the single person at the far end, the absence of a government behind her. He composed himself. He opened proceedings. This session convenes under Compact Charter Article 3 to address the consolidated jurisdictional dispute filings associated with human vessel registrations. He looked at the human table. The filing party, please identify yourself and your authorizing body, Mara said. Captain Mara VOS, independent vessel. Corellian Drift, I have no authorizing body. A small sound moved through the chamber, not loud, the sound of many people shifting their attention at once. Thokolos looked at her for a moment. You are representing the consolidated human claims. I'm presenting an invoice, she said. She had expected them to object to this. She had prepared for various forms of the objection. Procedural challenges, questions of standing, arguments that without a recognized government behind her, she had no right to present claims on behalf of other vessels. The challenge came from the GTA's legal panel. 3 seats to her left, a sharp-faced Velhari attorney who had the particular energy of someone who had spent the morning sharpening arguments. He stood. He raised the standing issue directly. No recognized human government, no authorized delegation, no legal basis for a consolidated presentation. Mara let him finish. Then she opened the Compact Charter on her laptop and read aloud Article 3, subsection 12. Any individual party to a jurisdictional dispute may present claims on behalf of other affected parties who have provided written authorization, regardless of governmental affiliation, provided that written authorization is on file with the arbitration registry. She had collected written authorizations, all of them. Every captain who had filed a notice had been asked in the same communication that confirmed receipt of their filing to sign a 1-page authorization form, allowing their claims to be presented in consolidated proceedings. 1216 authorizations filed with the arbitration registry 3 days before the session. She had the registry confirmation number. She read it aloud. The sharp-faced attorney sat down. Thokolos looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression that she did not try to name. He nodded once. You may proceed, he said. She went line by line. It took 4 hours. She did not rush. She did not perform. She read each category of claim. In plain terms, the seizures, the dates, the vessels, the amounts, the unlawful appeal fees, the obstruction charges generated by the license suspensions, the settlement offer and its recorded acknowledgement of liability, the interest calculations cited. Article 17 applied consistently across every category. She had organized it so that the legal basis for each charge was stated once clearly at the start of each section, and then the numbers followed. She had done this because the numbers were large and she wanted the legal foundation under them to be visible before the size of them landed. The GTA's legal panel objected at various points. Each objection was on record. She had responses prepared for 42 possible objections. She used 29 of Them, the chamber was very quiet while she worked the other species. Representatives were listening. Some of them were taking notes. Tarathi delegate in the third row had brought up a document on his own screen and appeared to be running parallel calculations which she found interesting but did not address. At the end of the fourth hour she reached the final page. She read the total number filled the chamber the way sound fills a room. It expanded into the available space and touched every wall, and then settled. She closed the final page. She looked at Thokolos. That is the invoice, she said. The GTA's response took 3 days. She stayed in a transit accommodation near the central complex, small room, functional bed, a window that looked out over a landing approach corridor where ships moved in slow procession at all hours. She watched them sometimes in the evenings. Freighters mostly, working ships, scarred and ordinary, carrying the commerce of the compact from one place to another the same way. They always had. She did not do very much during those 3 days. She had been running at full capacity for 2 months, and her body had decided, in the relative quiet of the transit room, to begin collecting on the debt. She slept long hours. She ate real meals at the station's common food hall and sat at a corner table and did not read anything while she ate, which was unusual for her. Demetri sent her one message on the second day. It said, "Route clear, cargo delivered. How are you?" She replied, "Fine. 3 eggs and actual bread this morning." He replied, "Good." That was the whole conversation, and it was sufficient. On the third day, Thokolos' office sent a formal communication requesting a private settlement session. She went. Settlement session was in a smaller room than the arbitration chamber. 4 people from the GTA side, including Chavaram, who sat at the far end of the table and looked at her with an expression she recognized. Now the expression of a man who had adjusted his understanding of a situation several times in recent weeks and was still in the process of adjusting. They did not pay the full invoice. She had never expected them to pay the full invoice. The full invoice was what you wrote on the page when you wanted to establish the true scale of what had happened, when you needed the number on record before you began talking about what portion of it would move today. They paid 63%. 63% of her number distributed across all the filing vessels according to their individual claim amounts with an administrative processing schedule of 90 days. She accepted this. She accepted it because 63% of her number was still large, because every credit of it was going into the official record as unlawful collection returned under arbitration, which meant the precedent was not just set but stamped and filed in part of the compact's legal history, because the other 37% would be available to future claimants through the same process. Now that the process existed, she accepted it, and she shook the hand of the GTA senior representative, which required a slight translation of gesture because Valhari did not shake hands in the same way, but both parties understood the intent, and she picked up her laptop and her notepad and her colored clips, and she walked out. Chavram caught up with her in the corridor. He walked beside her for a few steps. She led him. "Captain Voss," he said. She kept walking. "For what it's worth," he said, and then he stopped. She stopped too, turned to look at him. He was quiet for a moment. He looked like a man choosing words, carefully for reasons that were not entirely professional. The people who wrote that clause, he said, in 2271. They planned a very long way ahead. Yes, she said. They trusted that someone would find it. She looked at him. They trusted that someone would need it, she said. Finding it was the easy part. She turned and walked to the transit hub and booked a return passage to way station Muhar 9. She was on the transit ship 14 hours into the journey, sitting in the narrow passenger cabin with her laptop open and the final session documents pulled up for a last review. When the notification came through, it was an administrative document, standard GTA impound management correspondence. She received these occasionally notices about vessels in various stages of processing, referrals, status updates on cases she had cited in her filings. This one was an impound release list, a batch clearance of 14 vessels that had been held in GTA impound pending legal review, released following the arbitration settlement, administrative action attached to the broader resolution as an unstated line item, the kind of thing that happens in the back offices while the main proceedings take up everyone's attention. She scrolled through it. 12 of the 14 vessels were ones she recognized, ships cited in the mass filings, vessels that had been seized whole, rather than just their cargo, sitting impound for months or years while their owners paid fees and filed appeals and eventually gave up. She kept scrolling. The 13th entry, vessel ID M7731, Voss class, mid-range independent freighter, impound duration 13 years, 4-month status, released impound, account cleared, available for owner collection at GTA holding facility, Sector 9, Bay 14. She read it. She read it again, then again, slower. The Edna Me. She did not move for a long time. The transit ship hummed around her. The cabin was small and the light was the standard flat white of transit accommodations, and outside the porthole was the blank dark of open space between stations. Her laptop screen had gone to standby. She did not wake it. She sat with her hands on the table in front of her flat, not doing anything. Demetri was going to ask her about the settlement figures. She had the numbers ready. She had the distribution schedule and the processing timeline and a clear brief on what each captain should expect and when. She had prepared all of this on the second day in the transit room while she was supposed to be resting. She would tell him all of it later. She reached forward and woke the screen and pulled up the impound release document and read the line again one more time to confirm it was still there, still saying what it said, because she was a person who verified numbers before. She trusted them. It was still there. Status released. She put the laptop on the seat beside her. She turned off the cabin light. She sat in the dark with the hum of the transit ship around her and the blank dark outside the porthole, and 13 years of something in her chest that had no name she had ever given it. She did not cry until the cabin was fully dark and the corridor outside was quiet. Even then it was brief. One hand over her mouth, eyes closed, the kind of crying that has been waiting a long time and is very tired and does not have the energy to be large, only real. Then she turned the light back on. She washed her face at the small sink. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, the gray at her temples, the Lines the face that had stopped making apologies for itself years ago, and she nodded once at herself for no particular audience. She sat back down. She opened the laptop. She finished her review of the settlement documents. There was still work to do. The Edna Me was in Bay 14, Sector 9. Exactly where the document said it would be. Mara went alone. She told Demetri she needed to inspect a reclaimed vessel before arranging transport. She told him to prep the Corellian drift for departure because she wanted to move cargo within the week. Both of these things were true. Neither of them was the whole truth, and Demetri, who had worked with her for 6 years and understood the geography of what she did and did not say, accepted them without follow-up questions. The bay was large and mostly dark. GTA holding facilities were not maintained with comfort in mind. Cold air, harsh light at intervals, the kind of place designed for storage rather than visits. She found it in the back of the bay. It was smaller than she remembered. She had been 31 the last time she stood next to it, and she had been different then, and things look different when you are different, but it was also genuinely smaller than the Corellian drift. She had been young when she owned it, running smaller routes, and the ship had matched the scale of that life. The hull was oxidized where it had been in cold storage too long without maintenance cycles. The running lights were dead. One of the landing struts had a visible stress crack from something that had happened during impound that she was going to need a full structural report on. Through the forward viewport she could see that the secondary navigation console was stripped, missing panels, open cable bundles hanging, some GTA processing tech having pulled components for some other use and never replaced them. She stood outside it for a moment. Then she turned on her flashlight and entered through the docking hatch, which still used the same manual override code she had set when she first took ownership, which she still remembered because she had not ever tried to forget it. The code worked. The hatch opened. She walked through slowly, flashlight in one hand, notepad in the other. She moved through each section of the ship: cargo hold, engine bay, crew quarters, galley, navigation deck, and she looked at everything and she wrote down everything that needed attention. The list was long. The engine would need a full inspection before she ran it. The water reclamation system had failed at some point in the 13 years and would need to be rebuilt from the secondary components. The life support diagnostics board was offline. The cargo hold seals needed replacing. The galley had been stripped of its equipment, same as the nav console, cleared out by whoever managed impound as a resource efficiency measure. She wrote it all down. She was not calculating cost yet. That came later. Right now she was just looking, just making the list, just being present in each room of the ship with her flashlight and her notepad, moving carefully in the dark. She stopped in the forward cabin. The pilot's seat was still there. They had not taken the seat. It was the same seat, the left armrest worn smooth, the back adjusted slightly to the right, the way she had always kept it. The console in front of it stripped and dark, but the bones of it unchanged. She put her hand on the back of the seat. The material was cold. Impound bay cold, deep in it. The kind of cold that accumulates over years in a space where no body heat has moved. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the back of the pilot's seat. In a ship she had watched being towed away 13 years ago, on a dock while she held herself still and waited until she was out of scanner range before she let herself feel it. She was not out of scanner range now. She was standing inside it, her hand on the seat. The cold of it, the dark around her. She stood there for a long time, not moving, not writing anything, not doing anything at all. Then she took her hand away and turned back toward the hatch. She had a list. There was work to do. The ship was fixable. All of it was fixable. Nothing she had written down was beyond the reach of time and work, and the knowledge of two people who, between them, had been repairing things for the better part of a century. She walked back through the ship and out through the hatch and stood outside in the cold bay and clipped her pen to the notepad and folded it shut. The Corellian Drift and the Edna May sat side by side in their docks at Way Station Muhar 9 under the same dock lighting that lit everything else at this station. Practical and honest, and not designed to make anything look better than it was. They were not impressive ships. They were not the kind of vessels that drew attention when they came into dock. They were working ships, both of them beat up, functional, carrying the evidence of every hard season they had been through and every patched hull plate and replaced landing strut and replaced again landing strut. Dmitri stood beside Mara on the platform. Between the two docked ships, he had his coffee, she had hers. They had been standing there for several minutes without speaking, which was a normal amount of silence for them. He had read the impound release list without being told to. She had expected that. He had not said anything about the Edna May when she came back from the holding facility. He had looked at her notepad, the pages of repair notes she had brought back, and he had looked at her and he had said, "I'll call Vargas in the morning. He does good structural work and he owes me from the Harlan job." That was all she had said. Good. Now they stood between the two ships and drank their coffee in the quiet of the dock. 3 months, she said, maybe 3.5 if the engine needs more than the inspection turns up. I can do the water reclamation myself, he said. The secondary components are standard issue. I've rebuilt 3 of them. The nav console is going to cost. We can afford it. He said this as a straightforward fact. The settlement distribution had cleared. Their share of it was sitting in the account. It was not unlimited, but it was real, and it was enough. She nodded. She looked at the Edna May, the oxidized hull, the dead running lights, the cracked strut she had photographed and already sent to 2 structural engineers for quotes. All of it fixable. All of it just work. The kind of work she knew how to do, had always known how to do, would do with her hands and her time and the list on the notepad until there was nothing left unchecked. Mara, Dmitri said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the steady expression of a man who does not say things he does not mean. You got it back, he said. She looked at the ship. Not just the ship, she said. He was quiet. He understood what she meant. He was that kind of person. They stood there until the coffees were finished and the dock began to pick up its morning traffic, ships moving in and out, the ordinary industry of the station resuming around them. Then Marivis picked up her notepad and uncapped her pen and walked back toward the Edna May. The hatch opened on the same code it always had. She went inside. She started at the beginning of the list.